Chemtrails are a reality, whether we choose to believe it or not. Just like any other thing, you can choose ignorance for bliss, or discover the truth, regardless of how nasty, unpleasant, and shocking it is. Chemtrails have been an ongoing controversy for years now. The government has admitted to previous experiments carried out on the public during the Cold War, but denies any knowledge about the current existence of chemtrails. Fact is that anyone who looks up will at some point or another notice these trails left behind an aircraft. We all know that contrails will usually dissipate within a few minutes, although in some cases they may last longer. Aircraft contrails consist of harmless chemicals found in our atmosphere, such as oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, and carbon dioxide. Chemtrails, on the other hand, consist of harmful elements such as zinc, cadmium sulfide, aluminium, and barium. In many ways, we are being conditioned to accept certain cloud formations as natural, whereas in reality they are chemtrails. This can make it very difficult to distinguish the difference. Independent research, having delved surface deep into the subject, shows the unofficial admittance of small particles being spread into the atmosphere in order to combat global warming. Apparently, the particles affect the sunlight and prevent it from reaching the Earth to some extent.
A chemical concoction comprising cadmium was used to mimic how a biological germ cloud would spread if Soviet Russia released one during an attack on us. Rural Bedfordshire was sprayed from aircraft and, more shockingly, from a converted lorry. The city of Norwich was hit over a sustained period. The Ministry of Defence have consistently said there was no significant health risk as a result of the experiments.
I used to work in the cancer field and I always knew that cadmium, was a deposit in your body that you oughtn't to have. Why they chose cadmium, why they did the whole test, is a mystery to me.
The rumours were rife about this. They were experimenting with different things. And the major one was gas, the use of gas in wartime.
What you don't know, you don't worry about. So if they're doing something that they haven't told you about, then the fewer people that know about it, then it's a better kept secret, isn't it?
Recent document has come to light from Portendown which shows that they didn't check this substance for toxicity prior to the spraying, or indeed even afterwards. The former Portland scientist who investigated this in 1999 was quite surprised that no one had bothered to research on how this would affect the public.
The amount of cadmium we're exposed to anyway, which is released by industry into the atmosphere, is very much greater than anyone was exposed to from this.
The population of Norfolk, the population around Bedford, in fact the whole east of England, could still be at risk from future experiments, which the Ministry of Defence refused to rule out.
What we need is a globally harmonised system for evaluating those to make sure that they are actually legitimate proposals and that they won't in themselves have a negative impact on the very planetary systems that they're studying.
So how are people in this area communicating all of this with policymakers? I mean, we had Sir John Beddington before us recently. I mean, what are you doing to get the ear of people like him in government?
I have to say I don't know, but I'm sure
you see the point that I'm making. You know, I mean, you're coming along here today, both of you, saying, you know, this is in its infancy, but we've got some interesting ideas to take forward. And unless you are able to create that critical mass of involvement and to grab the other policymakers, then you're not going to get very far, right?
Well, the policy influences on governments tend to be made through scientific groups. There's the Royal Academy of Engineering is pressing in that direction through its president. The Royal Society is pressing for progress in that direction. I know the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, to which I belong, is very active in that.
So you think we're going to have relatively soon a critical mass of evidence and arguments that government departments like DEFRA and DIAS will have to take notice of?
Well, partly I would say we haven't got all the evidence, but we cannot afford to wait. Predictions of the way global temperatures will increase, and from the present they plan out there are many different models giving somewhat different results, but they all go in one direction, and so the urgency is not entirely established.
Okay. Are there any governments in the world? I mean, we know in the past, certainly it's been reported in a small scale that countries like China, even as recently as the Olympics, and the Soviet Union have experimented with things that will actually change the climate temporarily. Do we know if there are any national governments that are currently pursuing an active program of geoengineering research?
In the free world, research sponsorship is done by agencies which are not closely tied to governments, and certainly there are such projects in the US, in the UK, and elsewhere.
The government has instructed a variety of independent bodies to convey their messages and execute their experiments. On the one hand, you have organizations such as the National Environment Research Council, who conduct public interviews and workshops to inform people about geoengineering. Their approach is purely based on the global warming issue, and their aim is to somewhat desensitize the people to these experiments. Again, possible health risks are not being addressed. Neither is any real information being disclosed. All that is done is given inaccurate and vague information about climate change and how the experiments that are carried out are for the benefit of the planet. In reality, they are nothing but a distraction think tank, although most of their staff on the lower levels are not aware of this and actually believe they're doing good. The Center for International Governance Innovation is yet another interesting organization to look at. Their scientists do the research on our government's behalf, both in the USA and in Europe, as well as many other countries in the world. They are the ones who inform the public, however only ever tell us what they have been instructed to by those in the higher levels of the government. They receive funding from the government as well as globalist industry. The name alone is giving it away. International governance? If you take the definition of the words innovation, international, and governance, you can clearly see that it depicts an intention for a global governance agenda and furthermore supports the New World Order. Contractors who carry out these experiments include Raytheon, who have been involved in a number of shady ventures in recent years, as well as BAE Systems and General Electric.